A week and a day from Christmas. Yeah. Okay. All right. So I'm here this morning because one of the things that I constantly have mentioned is your predeterminants in your DNA. Now, this goes to, I'm not tooting my own horn, but I just want to mention that I've never read anything like that. It does exist. And I've come across it today, this morning, when I was doing my little, I read something every day, you know. So I have stated repeatedly that I do not believe that uh, mental illness is completely hereditary. Um, that uh, you know, it could be in your DNA, but it may not show itself until you're exposed to certain traumas. The actual term for that is called the diathesis stress model of psychosis. Diathesis stress model, okay, which assumes that genetic risk plus traumatic events can lead to psychosis. It says psychosis here, but I would say that would be for any mental health disorder. Um, and as of today is the first time that I ever actually read something like that. So I just want to, when I say I'm not tooting my own horn, but I am, because this just goes to show like my level of intelligence. Based on everything that I've read in life, I was able to also come to the diathesis stress model without ever having read any material on it. Okay. However, they are actually starting to believe that genetic risk becomes less important in explaining psychosis. Okay. And the reason that it's important to why I'm mentioning psychosis is because psychosis is what I believe that narcissistic people are psychotic, or like they're in a state of psychosis. Schizophrenic state of psychosis, borderline personality disorder is right on the border. They're not completely in psychosis, but they hang it within the balance. You know, that's how myself came up with my imaginary friends throughout childhood and things like that. So um, I'm going to read this. This is I've read from this website before. It's called madinamerica.com. Okay, so new study finds connection between childhood trauma and psychosis. Okay, this was published by Ashley. Ashley Boback, PhD. Okay, December 15th. Just looked up, it's 333. Hey, what's up? All right, so the relationship between childhood trauma and later development of psychotic symptoms has received increasing attention in recent years. A new study published by Schizophrenia Bulletin Open examines this relationship further, specifically looking at cases of schizophrenia that are treatment resistant. Um, so just just a reminder that all mental illness is kind of like a step ladder, okay? I remember I started with saying it just starts with your attachment style. It gradually elevates from like symptoms like depression, anxiety, um, obsessive compulsive behavior, and then it gradually progresses into uh, personality disorders. So, no, this does not talk about narcissistic personality disorder specifically, but again, all of these things come from your traumas, mostly begin in childhood and come from narcissistic abuse. Okay, so that's where the link is here and why I'm reading this. Sorry. Um, authors found a correlation between childhood adversity and psychotic symptoms, especially hallucinations. Okay, they recommend that treatment for psychosis, which traditionally has avoided trauma related work, incorporate approaches that directly address traumatic uh, experiences. Okay, and the authors led by Robert Dudley of the Early Intervention Psychosis Services, NHS Trust, and University of York. Sorry. Early adversity, such as childhood neglect or abuse, is associated with an increased risk of a range of mental health issues, including psychosis. Early adversity was strongly associated with increased risk of psychosis, and people with schizophrenia are 2.72 times more likely to have experienced adverse childhood events than healthy individuals. Evidence supports a causal role as longitudinal studies indicate early adversity precedes the onset of psychosis. Real quick, Richard Grandin's video that I had posted briefly talks about how the delusions of the narcissist are created, and it commonly starts in childhood as well. Okay, so childhood experiences of abuse and neglect have been shown to lead to increased risk for later development of psychotic symptoms, which can include positive symptoms such as hallucinations and delusions. I don't know why they consider that positive. It's in quotations though. Positive is in quotations. I would assume that that would just be the better of the two, right? Because negative symptoms are described as lack of emotional expression. All right, so just the other day, I was watching a video about nonchalant men, okay? Men who do not seem to care about their partners, okay? That is a negative symptom, such as a lack of emotional expression. Now, this article is speaking specifically on schizophrenia, but when I'm trying to talk about how it's not limited to the numbers of people who have been considered mentally ill, the numbers do not account for that. Think of how many people you know that suffer from a lack of emotional expression and do not have a diagnosis, have never been to a therapist. Think about it. Because there's whole channels that are devoted to talking about nonchalant men, dismissive personality, dismissive attachment styles. Are we getting the links? Are we getting the links? Are we drawing the links? Existing research has shown that individuals experience psychosis with histories of childhood maltreatment are more likely to experience severe symptoms that are not responsive to medications or therapies. Okay, so stopping again to talk about myself. I have found that there is a particular symptom that I have that no matter how much therapy I've got, how much medication I have taken, does not dissipate. But I'm not in psychosis, but I have mentioned that recently to someone. Like, it doesn't matter how much therapy I get. But here is my theory surrounding this. These behaviors are very hard for people to, they're very off-putting, right? Again, something else I just said the other day. Okay, they're very off-putting. It's very hard to create connections when you have this level of mental illness. So the reason that the treatments do not work is because therapy is not interpersonal. When you go to therapy, your therapist is not your friend. You know what I'm saying? It's not an intimate relationship. When you take medication, those things are not attacking the actual issue, which is your inability to create relationships and stable foundations, which then affect the hierarchy of needs. The actual treatment that is needed is a stable relationship. Which I've already done, covert emotional incest and the hierarchy of needs. Check that video out. But anyways, psychiatric literature refers to these forms of psychosis as treatment-resistant schizophrenia, treatment-resistant psychosis. They are defined in terms of lack of responsiveness to at least two forms of antipsychotic medication, with the atypical antipsychotic drug, clozapine, being offered as a last resort due to its potentially dangerous side effects. Okay, research literature interested in cognitive understanding of psychosis has also investigated the role of negative beliefs about self and others brought on by childhood adversity play in the development of symptoms such as paranoia and delusions. As someone who has experienced paranoia, most of the time it's actually warranted. You know what I'm saying? Like, when they ask me, are you paranoid? I'm like, kind of a little bit. But the reason I'm paranoid is because a complete stranger came to my door after meeting me at the store, and I had somebody leave shit on my doorstep, and I had dead birds everywhere. Like, yeah, it's a warranted paranoia. You know what I'm saying? And most of the time, these people, their paranoia isn't of delusion. There is something that is notably, the fear is reasonable. It's just that when you're dealing with like narcissistic people, psychotic people, equally equally psychotic, equally sociopathic, the things that they do to you, it's hard for other people to see it, right? If I sit here and I say I'm being stalked, but you don't see it yourself, that is now described as paranoia, when it's just the fact that this person has deployed people to attack you. You know, the flying monkeys. Actually, flying monkeys just came up on my screen not too long ago when I was scrolling this morning. So, yeah, I've been up since like 3. So, I've done a lot in 3 hours. Now going on 4 hours. So, while some have found relationships between negative beliefs about self and others, childhood abuse and neglect, and paranoia or other psychotic symptoms later in life, the research findings so far have been inconsistent. And the reason that is because the paranoia, the negative, okay, those inconsistencies are because some of it has to do with the type of relationships that you build outside of childhood, like in adulthood, and like who you're dealing with within adulthood, and more the childhood. Essentially, the link is the childhood trauma, but everything that you experience within adulthood is a result of that trauma from childhood, right? So I'll mention paranoia again. Okay, I experienced extreme paranoia at some point in my life, and it's shown that I was actually being stalked. It's in my documents. I was being stalked. That wouldn't have anything to do with, essentially, it wouldn't have anything to do with childhood abuse, in the sense that it's not the childhood abuse that caused the paranoia, but the relationship that I made with the person that was stalking me was a result of the childhood trauma. If that makes sense. So that's why it would be inconsistent to always say it's because of their childhood abuse. Like, it is but because of their childhood abuse, but it's a different element. In an attempt to further the research base on the correlations between psychosis, childhood adversity, and negative beliefs, Dudley and colleagues collected. There has been. Okay. Dudley and colleagues collected data from 292 participants who were a part of a larger trial aimed at assessing the efficiency of cognitive behavioral therapy uh, for clozapine resistant schizophrenia. The majority of participants were white, 90%. 72% were male. 83% of them were unemployed and had a diagnosis of schizophrenia. Okay, and that was 87% of this. They didn't give the number. Oh, 292. So out of 292 participants, 87% of them had schizophrenia, 83% of them were unemployed, 72% of them were male, and 90% of them were white. This is very important because they do mention here later in this that they need to research people of color. But just consider what that means for Caucasians as a whole. The researcher used a variety of questionnaires and rating scales to gather information on participants' experience of childhood adversity, psychotic symptoms, and core beliefs about self and others. Okay, then they conducted statistical analyzation to examine their data. Dudley and colleagues found that the level of abuse and neglect endorsed by the participants was similar to the levels reported in other research involving psychosis and childhood trauma, providing additional support for the connections between childhood trauma and later development of psychosis. Consistent with the research literature, female participants reported high levels of severe sexual and emotional abuse. Overall, adversity was found to be related to higher levels of psychotic symptoms across the board. Looking closer, positive symptoms such as hallucinations, positive because it's not really positive to have hallucinations, but were found to be more influenced by past experiences of childhood adversity. Researchers also found a relationship between childhood abuse and neglect and negative beliefs about self and others. Now, it's almost redundant. Why you keep saying that? We get it. Okay. Though the relationships found by researchers were modest correlations, their findings were consistent with other research that has found that childhood trauma can lead individuals with psychosis experiencing distressing symptoms. Okay. Given the support for the relationship between childhood adversity and later development of treatment-resistant psychotic symptoms, Dudley and colleagues conclude by recommending that further exploration into the use of trauma-focused therapies such as EMDR, I have something to say about that, which is called eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and the treatment of psychosis to address the underlying issues of trauma that contribute to it. Another recent study also arrived at similar conclusions, pointing at how trauma therapies can be effectively used in treatment of psychosis. So saying EMDR. Here's the thing about EMDR. I actually tried EMDR in 2011, 2012, around 2013, around the time that I got pregnant with Natanya. It did not work. And here's why. If you don't know what your trauma is, like when I did it, the traumas that I was trying to reprogram were so insignificant, really. Like in the grand scheme of things, what I was trying to reprogram was so minor that it had no effect because the actual trauma still hadn't been addressed, right? So it can be, but they have to know what their trauma is. It sounds like a lot of these people do. So I guess that's why it would be successful, you know. Limitations of the study include a lack of information regarding the specifics of trauma's experience, such as nature, duration, and frequency, as well as how participants perceive the impact of trauma on their lives. Additionally, the sample consisted of predominantly white men, leading to questions about whether the results would be generalized to other populations. Further research involving more diverse populations, especially people of color, is necessary, especially given the impact that oppression and marginalization have been shown to have on the development and treatment of psychosis. This here is very important, okay, because people of color do have a different level of trauma that is not limited to their family, right? So when you add all of those things together, okay, this is why this is why people of color had constantly here's oh God. People of color for generations, right? I can give you an example in my own life. My mother says to me, I have Jesus, so I don't have any depression. I don't have anything. You need to turn to Jesus, and then you won't be depressed. Her tone. I'm literally using her tone, right? Psychosis. Do you understand what I'm saying here? Like, the way that we have been programmed, we are in denial, and we don't have any self-awareness. So we therefore continue to force other people within our collective race, you know what I'm saying, not to seek help for mental health issues because they have Jesus. You're not oppressed. I'm abundant in the name of Jesus. I'm not. I believe in Jesus, okay? I believe in Jesus, but this is an added layer to the trauma. Anyway, research elsewhere has pointed to the role that racism and structural inequalities play in the development and increased risk of psychosis, as well as how these systemic inequalities negatively affect psychosis treatment itself. Okay, so current understandings of psychosis rely heavily on a biological model, which emphasizes brain and genetic-based understandings of psychosis and its symptoms. However, it has been critiqued for explaining very little about how a person comes to develop schizophrenia. Additionally, a recent study found that genetic risk for development of schizophrenia become less important as more traumatic events are experienced, which contradicts the diathesis stress model, which assumes that genetic risk plus traumatic events can lead to psychosis. It's so important. 23. Trauma is trauma. So these days, what they're saying is, this isn't really a hereditary issue anymore. Trauma is trauma. Long-term trauma is now causing mental illness without even having the marker. So, the pushback and mounting research evidence against biological models of understanding has paved the way for alternative, less pathologizing ways of understanding psychosis through a recognition that experiences of psychosis are nuanced and vary for each individual. Okay, others have urged non-pathologizing and interdisciplinary approaches to understanding psychosis. And peer support groups such as Hearing Voices have shown to hold many benefits, including fostering human connection and respecting lived experiences. Okay, so Dudley and colleagues, alongside others, contribute to this growing and important body of work by providing further research, support for the recognition of the role trauma plays in the development of psychosis, which allows for increased movement away from biological understandings. Hope you understood one, I like to see that. I like to see that. You know, my brain, how my brain works. I like to see that. This is a reflection of how my brain works. But it's also important to note, because it specifically speaks on psychosis, and it specifically speaks on the lack of expression of emotion. Okay. When I say it's 40%, when I say it, when you sit and you think about what channels are devoted to, what you see within social media, when you see a large influx of a certain complaint, of a certain trait, is it possible to see that it is more than 1%? Is it possible to see it's more than 6%? Because I think I forget what my statistic was for schizophrenia. I think it was somewhere in between 1 point. No, that was bipolar. But either way, it still falls within that, right? It was 1.4 to 6.3. So though the people that they're complaining about, they don't have a diagnosis, but they wouldn't have that diagnosis because they are clearly showing signs of psychosis. They're zombies. You know? I have more to say today. I'll probably be doing a little more videos. Now that Aaron is on Christmas break, I'll probably do a few more videos because the main issue has been just finding time because I'm living my life now that my child is living his, you know. So he's back home for a couple weeks. I won't have to get up and do my daily routine and stuff. I had a video that I posted about female friendships. I didn't like how it came out. I'm gonna try to redo that one here in the next couple of days. Yeah. I'll see y'all around. Y'all have a good day.